Welcome back to the show, everybody. It's your host, John Scardena. So this month, August, right, is the 30th anniversary for Hurricane Andrew, which some have argued is a game changer in emergency management. I would argue that Hurricane Katrina was also a major impact of things that needed to change. Hurricane Harvey is another big one that identified how a response should be run. There was a lot of successes there, but it was overwhelming, just like Hurricane Katrina was, and just like Hurricane Andrew. There's big storms out in the ocean. Literally right now, there's a 70% chance of a storm developing into a hurricane, and so we're fingers crossed that it stays out in the Atlantic. But either way, we wanted to replay an old episode back all the way back about 100 episodes ago to episode number 20, where I interviewed James Dewer, and we just had a great conversation. If you remember, James Dewer was my deputy there in Hurricane Harvey, and we talked about the lessons learned. We talked about implementation. We talked about GIS and what GIS can do for the field. And so in this anniversary month, as we look back on lessons learned, things that went well, things that didn't go so well, different disasters, that true after action perspective, and it being August 30th, the day that this should be coming out, we just want to reaffirm with the field. Other episodes that touch on hurricane responses and hurricane know-how. We just had a recent episode with Ken Graham, the director of the National Weather Service. We also had an episode with Jamie. He's the acting director of the National Hurricane Center. Really, really important stuff that people should look at. We want to focus on using our counterparts, looking at weather, looking at GIS, looking at how we can gain situational awareness in a disaster. So without any further ado, episode 20, we're going to replay it right now. Here we go. Welcome back to the podcast show, everybody. It's your host, John Scardena. Of course, we have another excellent show for you where we have an interview with James Dewer, my deputy from Hurricane Harvey, in the GIS section. Man, we had such a great experience out there. A lot of lessons learned. And what I mean by great is we just went and kicked butt, essentially. So this is going to be a little different episode where we're going to be talking about that shared experience about Hurricane Harvey, using those past experiences from other disasters, possibly what's happening right now with Hurricane Laura. If you've been watching that news, it's completely ripped through the state of Louisiana as its trajectory across the United States. So we hope everybody's doing well out there. But with August 25th being the anniversary of Hurricane Harvey, with us talking about it so much this season, I thought it'd be great to have James on here to talk about that emergency management perspective. What actually happened? What was the tempo like? What was the environment like from his perspective and that shared experience? And then we'll also, of course, go into the details of why Hurricane Harvey is such an impactful event, not just talking about the 117 hours of stalled Category 4 hurricane over the state of Texas, but what those numbers mean to people who live there, some of those experiences that we had out there. And so this is a longer introduction, but we just really want to set the stage for having, again, one of my great friends and highly respected emergency manager and one of the most respected GIS professionals in the country, who's had lots of experience, not just with Hurricane Harvey, but with numerous other disasters, representing FEMA Region 10, going out there and representing FEMA as the GIUL in the federal response for Superstorm Sandy. He's had the Administrator's Award for Excellence in FEMA, both in 2011 and 2014, for his technology innovation. The guy is just really phenomenal. Talk about an intro. James, welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be on. I love being the center of attention. So.
James, I'm really grateful that you're able to come on here because you and I have a shared experience that a lot of people don't get to see, that side of emergency management. And I just kind of want to start it off by talking about that deployment order. So as people may know, when we get out to a disaster, when the national teams get out to disaster, we have to request a ton of people. In fact, Hurricane Harvey at one point had 26,000 people deployed. And so there's a mass order that goes out. And so I went over and begged my boss. I mean, at the time we had Hurricane Irma just starting up. We had all these other events happening, and so the resources were quote unquote stretched. But I begged for James, who I met in Region 10, and I got him out there. And so you were like this like heaven sent miracle for me, somebody I could trust, somebody I knew. Did I reached out? I think I reached out to you first before I might have reached out to Rodney. Did you have a heads up before you got the deployment order?
I believe I did.
Yeah.
I believe that you contacted me first and let me know what was going on. And that at that point, it was pretty clear that I was going to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And so Austin, which is where we were for Harvey, was probably the best option.
Real quick, we're going to pause for this week's Disaster Tough endorsements. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today. The L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio at L3Harris.com right now. Okay, let's jump back in.
Yeah.
You're welcome. I don't know.
Yeah, I thank you.
Yeah. Well,
thank you.
You definitely got some barbecue out of it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did.
You know, thinking of Harvey so much this weekend, and with you coming on, I was trying to remember the name of the barbecue place that was just down the street from the Joint Field Office at JFO. You know what I'm talking about? Like the little shack?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, you took me there the first day.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I got there at night.
Yeah.
And you sat me down and explained to me all the politics.
You know, I don't think people realize how political emergency management can get. You know, we have a lot of listeners on here who are either in the military and thinking about going into emergency management, or they're kind of looking at this from the ground level and looking up at the strategic level. And, you know, when you get into a field where you are coordinating between the political side, you know, those state and federal leaders, and, response, there is this juggle that happens where it becomes hyper political really quick. And I'll go out and I'll deal with kind of that politics side. I'll go into all those meetings, personnel issues, whatever. But when I have a specialized project, I want the most competent person I could possibly find. And so you and I started splitting off on those tasks together. Although you did get roped in a couple times, I felt bad for you on dealing with some of that politics stuff.
Yeah, it's hard to avoid, but I mean, I have been the GIUL, the geospatial unit leader. I was that for Hurricane Sandy, for example. That was probably the biggest disaster that I was the lead on.
Yeah. And
it just wasn't as fun because, I mean, for me, multitasking was just tasking multiple people, and as you mentioned, dealing with all the politics. I didn't get to do the fun stuff like making the maps and, you know, doing the fun little projects and
the thing you're trained to do. Yeah.
All meetings.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I was coming up with. I was getting really frustrated in previous disasters because I was expected to be the technical guy, to actually do all their maps for them, but then also be in all the meetings and to kind of push the agenda in the right direction.
Yeah.
I was like,
which is impossible.
Yeah, and I'm not going to have somebody come out there, to represent the unit, where I was like, I'm not going to have you come out there and have you do all the meetings. Like, that'd be messed up. So, like, from your perspective, okay, like, we should talk about Hurricane Sandy for a second anyways. So let's back up, because Hurricane Sandy, that was pretty unprecedented for the Northeast. I would think, like, that level of disaster, especially from a hurricane, comparing that to Hurricane Harvey tempo, because we've talked about that before in this podcast, what was you said the experience was rough, but like, what was better? What was different? But compared to the two disasters? What were some of the lessons learned for you?
Those were maybe the two biggest disasters I've worked. So what I would say is that I think for Harvey, things definitely, there was a good flow. Region 6, they have gotten some big disasters. I mean, they include Louisiana, so they dealt with Katrina. So they had a lot of experience dealing with hurricanes. Region 2, which covers New York, right, New Jersey, they, I don't know when the last time anything like Sandy hit that area. Yeah. So I don't, I know that their regional office in Manhattan got, I think, pretty kind of not wiped out, because, it was still there, but it was shut down. Yeah. And there was some chaos a little bit at the beginning. And also, Sandy was by far the biggest thing that happened at that time. Whereas you mentioned earlier with Harvey, FEMA was grappling with Harvey and also Irma, right, in Florida. And I don't think Maria had started yet.
Maria started about maybe 2.5 weeks after we got there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was anticipation there would be more hurricanes coming. And so FEMA's resources were more divided. With Sandy is unique in terms of hurricanes I can think of because it was so late. It happened at the very end of October.
It was election year that year too, right?
It was an election year. That's right. I was in they sent me, so I got the call and they sent me on a plane, to DC to work in their main operations center, right, the NRCC. And as soon as I got off the plane, they were like, okay, you're on the night shift, which makes sense because 3-hour difference, I'm already out of it. So why not just spend the first night up?
Yeah.
And, and anyways, the election happened, like while I was working that night. I remember daylight savings, or, what happened with the fallback. Yeah. And that was the weirdest thing because I was working the night shift, and I watched the clock go from like 1:59 to 1 o'clock again.
Oh, that's weird. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really weird. Yeah. But anyways, that was late in the year. So it was, I think, pretty much, it was probably assumed there wasn't going to be any other big hurricanes at that point. So, FEMA just threw everything at that one. They threw everything they had. Whereas, things were just kind of more split with Harvey.
Yeah.
And, I think like with Sandy, it was because there's so many people coming at once, and Region 2, I think maybe was also struggling to kind of get on their feet a little bit. That's kind of a little bit of assumption on my part.
Yeah.
I don't want to throw Region 2 under the bus here.
Well, they definitely have the experience now because they're doing everything with Puerto Rico.
Right. So, exactly. They're definitely. I think that I'm going on the theory that they may not have had as much of experience when it happened, when Sandy happened, but they do now. Anyways, it was kind of more like truly managed chaos. I mean, it was like when I got there, it was like people had very little cohesion or control or oversight on a lot of teams, including with the GIS unit.
Mm-hmm.
You heard the stories about FEMA, like would send the same not the same person, but they would send a person, the IA individual assistance member, would hit the same house 4 times.
Man.
And people, like, at one point got so sick of it, somebody actually pulled a gun on one of our FEMA people. They were like, this is the 4th time. And it was, in that case, still better to make sure, right, than not to hit those places. But that just goes to show you that they're having a harder time keeping track of and managing all of our resources and each other. And Harvey, that was a little easier. There was, I think there was a little bit of a turf war going on, right?
Yep.
We were fighting with resources with Region 4 in Florida at that point. So
yeah.
So I think right there, those are some differences. And I think there was a little bit more cohesion to Harvey, from the beginning than I initially found in Sandy. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about, so you kind of compare the two disasters, talk about the tempo and the changes there. What are some like memorable experiences from you, from Harvey? What was it like?
So Harvey, minus some of the politics that you mentioned.
Yeah.
I have found that every time there is a big disaster, there tends to be a little bit of shakeup that happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's a true baptism of fire. The people who can muddle through the medium-sized disasters oftentimes get exposed in the bigger disasters.
Mm-hmm.
They just can't
handle it.
Yeah. So putting that aside, there was a lot of great cohesion, using that word again, that happened with Harvey. As you kind of know, what's odd about FEMA and the disaster teams, right? And this is true with what we do with GIS, but this is, I think, true with a lot of FEMA teams as well, is that there was for a little period of time, right, under Craig Fugate, so under the Obama administration, that was the FEMA administrator. His number two during the later years, he came from the Coast Guard, and he talked about trying, to bring that kind of culture of the Coast Guard to FEMA. But the thing that makes it different from the Coast Guard, I think, and I've never been in the military, so just putting it out there, but my understanding is that generally you kind of have teams that you are with and you work with and you build the cohesion. And sometimes you might end up on another team, but I think oftentimes, especially if you're a reservist, I think oftentimes you kind of have your unit, right,
mm-hmm.
that you work with all the time. At FEMA, it's like they just, wherever they can get people, depending on who's available and the need, they put you together. And so it's exciting. Different disasters, you'll kind of see a lot of familiar faces, but it's always kind of different, right? And different dynamic.
Yeah.
But it also makes it hard to train. It makes it hard to create that unit cohesion, right? Yeah. You're just not able to, every time you kind of go into disaster, you're sort of having to recreate the wheel a little bit.
Yep.
And also with GIS, because FEMA is still, I left FEMA after Harvey, right?
Right.
So things may have changed a little bit since then, but
probably not.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. They were constantly trying to figure out how to leverage GIS and how to use it. And you always had, GIS is one of the few things I can think of within FEMA, one of the few resources where it just it varied from region to region, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in our region, we were housed within response, even though we supported the whole region. In some regions, they had it completely decentralized, because every little division, like mitigation or public assistance, wanted their own dedicated GIS person.
That's kind of like Region 6, right?
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. It could completely vary. And so, that makes it even more challenging for GIS. Every time you go into disaster, everybody's going to have different ideas, or generally did have different ideas of what role GIS should play. And the cohesion, like there would be infighting.
Mm-hmm.
Some units would want their own dedicated GIS person, and sometimes it was more centralized.
Mm-hmm.
With ours, it was as close as I've ever come to it being a ideal GIS event. We went in there, the way we organized the file system
mm-hmm.
was locked down so nicely, right? You remember that?
I remember how big of a deal that was for people, and I was like, guys, I've been up for 20 hours for like my 7th day in a row. I could care less.
Right.
Just go for it.
Yeah, totally. But, we were like, we were coordinating with in lock sync with Region 6, with Erica Siggins.
Mm-hmm.
That's
a name I haven't thought about in a while. Yeah.
Yeah. And Region, and then, there was, I know, an R.
Rochelle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rochelle Trollinger. Right.
Yeah,
she was right in our group, even though she was technically separate. She could have kind of gone her own way, done her own thing, with mitigation. She was working right, she sat right next to me. All of her people working with us. They kind of had their own projects, but they were also working in coordination with us. It was as close to a beautiful thing as I've ever seen in FEMA.
That makes me really happy. I'm going to be prideful here for a second, because that org chart that I developed followed that pattern. I worked I had to fight teeth and nail between Region 6 and different personalities. When I got out there, I was like, okay, I'm National IMAT's in charge. And there's a lot of politics that go involved, like, okay, it's our region, whatever. Like, nope. But the more I showed, okay, like, you can have essentially different departments all within the same unit. And so I got Rochelle on board. She probably got me on board, to be honest. But she's a pretty clever person. But, we called ourselves essentially the mom and dad of GIS, where, and yet there was a couple of little pockets, but all those pockets, anytime there was there was an issue with flood data or the flood model, and somebody was really pushing hard. I wanted to have my specific flood model. And yet following that file system and following that coordination of, okay, we're all going to be doing the same thing here. Even coordinating with headquarters, which is in a disaster, a beast of burden.
Yeah.
Just to be honest, people who work 8 hours a day versus, actually in the field doing the work. But like just that whole coordination part, it was, okay, everything has to be all within the same head. And I think that made things much easier to understand people's roles. That really comes back from Rodney Melsick, my old boss, of just like, I want to know he would push me really hard. I want to know your org chart. I want to know every role. I want to know the numbers. And so we knew all of that before we went into Harvey. So
Rodney was old school. So
dude,
Rodney's been around a long time.
Yeah. He's retired and he's helping us out at Doberman Emergency Management now. But
good for him. Yeah.
Yeah. Really cool guy.
Time,
I know, right? He's probably gonna laugh when he hears that because he listens to these.
Yeah, I know. I mean, he'd been around for he'd been there as long as I knew. So
yeah. Anyways, so I went into Harvey saying, here are the numbers. As you noted, we never got up to the numbers that I requested. A lot of people didn't. Yeah. Just working as a group in that same room, so many times they could have gone off into a different section, and I'm so glad it ended up staying because it proved a model of what you're saying of cohesion. She knew every single one of the people that came and worked for her. Mm-hmm. I knew you, and that was it.
Yep.
And man, that was a learning curve, but again, really hard to create that cohesion, but it was really important to do that.
But that was your biggest one up to that point, right?
Hurricane Harvey is definitely my biggest one in any of my federal jobs. In fact, there was a year where I went out from tornado to hurricane to wildfires, and I was actually pretty busy, but Hurricane Harvey by far was impactful. So just for our listeners, we want to provide some context of what was happening in the storm. And so, why are we always talking about this? Why are we bringing this up on the anniversary of Hurricane Harvey? Why are we talking about it during Hurricane Laura? Well, we really want to provide you guys that background, right? And that understanding. Hurricane Laura, if you've been watching that, it tore through the state of Louisiana, and it's going to move rapidly across the U.S. as it disperses and it breaks down. And yet, that's not what happened in Hurricane Harvey. What Hurricane Laura is doing is fairly typical for a massive hurricane. It will go in there and, rip through the state. Hurricane Harvey went there and it sat on the state for 4 days, which is ridiculous, by the way.
Yeah.
It stalled out. You're talking about a record of 117 hours of just stalling out a Category 4 storm. A Category 4 storm that produces, 130, 140 miles an hour winds. It created over 50 tornadoes, 52 tornadoes, if I recall correctly. It set the record for the most rainfall in a single rainstorm event. I think it was like 60 inches that fell in a single spot from the storm. I mean, these are just unprecedented numbers, and so that's why it was so impactful. It set so many records across the area, and we had lots of people displaced. We had 700,000 claims. We had noted at the time 300,000 structures that were damaged, that were flooded, right? 500,000 cars were flooded. We're talking about 60,000 people whose homes were gone. That's just the homes that were completely destroyed, 60,000 of those. And it took several months to get them into homes. In fact, into temporary housing outside of hotels. In fact, I had a story where I was going to visit my family in Houston, Beth, David, and their son, Andrew. I was coming out of the hotel, and I met a lady in the elevator with her and her 3 kids. And again, this is several months after the event. And we're talking in there, and she has a vacuum. And I said, hey, you got to vacuum. And, they got people here for that. And I was kind of making a joke about it. And then she goes, I have to vacuum my hotel room because I need a sense of normalcy. I've been here since Hurricane Harvey. She didn't know I was part of FEMA. She didn't know why I was out there. I was, just visiting family. My heart was breaking for them. In fact, I went out to Rockport and, several months after as well, flying the drone for FEMA, and it looked like it just hit. Hurricanes take a lot of time to recover. Disasters take a lot of time to recover in general, 10 years or so. But it was unprecedented what happened. And, we talk about that word. I actually hate that word now because of COVID-19, but the disaster was huge. In fact, were you there when, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for this guy from Region 8, older gentleman, really, really nice. GIS. Paul, yes.
Yeah.
Were you there when Paul made the map he took the flood data and put it in other areas of the United States?
Yes, I believe I was there. Yes.
It was
I
really
remember. I forgot about that until just now.
Yeah. It was like a really important project for him. And at the time I was like, why are you doing this? Because like the server crashed at one point, or he lost all of his data. He had to do it again. It took him like 15 hours straight of working on this project. And we're all, we're in response mode, and I couldn't figure out why. And then he hung up the posters, and I had more people in leaderships and in other sections talk about that, and like, oh, now I understand how big it is. So. Yeah. For our listeners, maybe we'll put it up on like our YouTube video when we do the YouTube video.
This is kind of a side tangent, but because Region 10 we have Alaska, we covered Alaska, and that was something that we would always try to help people, DC headquarters understand the challenging logistics of Alaska. Is that we would impose Anchorage on DC. And then have the rest of the state, and you could see like Seattle, going from Seattle, right, to Anchorage was like going from DC to, I think, Port-au-Prince. And,
oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could understand the distances and the logistical challenges of moving stuff all the way up there. So yeah, and those things were always popular and helped to clarify and wrap people's minds about what they were trying to deal with.
Yeah. So I mean, gosh, you make me want to talk about so many different things there, and including the future of GIS and emergency management. But just going back to that map, for people's understanding, the amount of flooding that happened in Texas was as if everything from Maine to DC had flooded, or if everything from San Francisco to San Diego in California was gone. I mean, it's just so much water in that state. And
it compressed the crust of the earth.
Right, 3 centimeters, right?
Yeah,
it'll take 100 years for that for the crust to decompress.
Yeah,
just from that one storm alone. So, pretty wild numbers. Something wild to think about. You talk about the future of GIS in emergency management, and where FEMA really needs to go with it. I think that map product that you made for Region 10 and for what Paul did for Harvey is a good indicator of what maps can do in terms of situational awareness. Even trying to explain it here on the podcast, people might be thinking about it, but seeing it visually and like having that instantaneous, like, oh.
Yeah.
I remember the FCO, Federal Coordinating Officer, he sent me an email, and I didn't even see the email, and Rochelle happened to be there. And she came back, and you were there, and they wanted to know 3 inches of how many homes had 3 inches of water in it, or more. Do you remember that? And
I remember getting a last minute request we had to go into an office. I don't know if it was that one though.
Yeah, you did that in under 15 minutes, and
wow.
Oh yeah. You're like, oh yeah, I could do, you Jamesed it. That's what I got. I don't know if we can turn that. But I remember you giving that to Rochelle, and Rochelle giving that to Kevin Hannes, and Jessica and Sean Rooney, which we got to talk about too, because I've given him so much crap about not coming on this podcast because he has a really cool job now. But just like blown away by the level of situational awareness that you could provide because you're so competent in your job.
GIS can do so much, but you still have to sell it. And even if you convince people that, hey, you can do all these great things, it still may not. They have to convince other people, hey, this could actually improve our processes if we do it this way, or we change things. Yeah. And change is always hard to do. So.
Well, if you recall Hurricane Harvey, we had a couple of, how would I say this, cleverly positioned ideas, including getting the drone.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, so, yeah.
I mean, like I said, Harvey was as close to being a beautiful thing as I've seen. The deployment I had the year before in North Carolina also was pretty nice in a lot of ways, but Harvey, because of its scale, was when the flood opens, the floodgates also can open for opportunities.
When it was 2 letters that came out. The first letter was from the FEMA administrator saying, because resources are stretched between multiple type 1 disasters, seek innovation. And then FCO backed that up and said, if you have an innovative idea that can help out the disaster, go for it. And I knew for a fact people didn't want the drone in different areas. But I took those 2 letters and I went straight to the FAA and I said, hey, we need actually I went to legal first. But we need the drone, and it can help us with data collection. And Sean Rooney, again, I'm calling you out, Sean. He was a huge part. He actually wrote up the documentation, the justification for getting the drone, and using his skill set there in writing. We need to talk about how he got on the group, by the way. But with him and with reaching out to the FAA and some other parts, I went straight to procurement, and I said, hey, we need a drone. This is the drone we need. I got the FCO to sign off of it, and the moment we got the drone, it was like all hell broke loose. There were so many people like, oh, how'd you get a drone? I want a drone. How dare you buy a drone? There, all kinds of different reactions. I
remember. I do actually remember some of those. There was I cannot remember his name off the top of my head, but he was like for his headquarters.
Oh, we don't mention his name ever.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. I know exactly.
I think you know who I'm talking about.
Came down there, and we had a disagreement, and I won.
I remember that. Yeah, I had forgotten about that until just now.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been a memory jet. This is.
I'm like starting to twitch, like remembering that conversation.
Yeah.
The biggest problem somebody can make about me is that they think they can manhandle me. Like he went in there thinking he could strong arm me and make me afraid of whoever he was, and I was like, okay, like that's not what we're about, dude. We're about like trying to help people out and innovative ideas and trying the whole deal. Well, he huffed and puffed and blew himself away. But I took out the drone. I kept it with me at all times. I wasn't going to let anybody else take that drone away. I was so afraid somebody was going to take it away. I took that drone to the wildfires later that year, and I found 30 additional homes with a 2-man crew in a third amount of time at almost no cost. And that was compared to a 33-person PDA team that was out there for 3 days. And so now, fast forward, they're still not talk about policy and trying to do things right. They kind of gave up a little bit. They could have done it in-house, but they handed it over to CAP, Civil Air Patrol, and now Civil Air Patrol is actively flying drones for the federal government, collecting data.
That seems to me like a good situation. I think.
The fact that they went from Cessnas to using drones. My big holdup, and I'm going to have somebody from Civil Air Patrol on here in the next couple of weeks. I'm really excited to have it. He's actually a drone guy. I'm going to have him on here, but my biggest holdup is somebody with a GIS background who's actually going to be looking at those images, who doesn't want to go through it manually. Somebody on the GIS side should be doing that. And so whether it's training or whatever, we want to reach out to the Civil Air Patrol and say, hey, this is the type of image you want to get. It's not about getting the sunset at the right angle to make it pretty. It's about damage collection. And there's some concerns there. Our company actually does that. There are some states who are wanting to do it on their own, especially for smaller disasters. And so we have a drone asset, and with my background in GIS, we're able to go out there and train them how to do it, and then also provide support and response as well. So a lot of great things there. Man, so many memories. Okay, I've teased this a few times. Sean freaking Rooney. I got to talk about this guy. If you recall, we requested, I think, 8 people, or 4 people from DHS to come out and help with GIS. And they promised 4 GIS people, and what we got was Sean Rooney, a writer with no experience whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And the day he got out there,
well, I forgot about that, how that happened.
Oh, that's my gosh, I was shocked. I walked out. I actually walked into the planning room, and he was standing there, and he goes, "Hey, I'm Sean Rooney, from DHS. I'm a writer, and critical infrastructure writer, and they want me to do GIS for 30 days." And I was like, "You got to be kidding me!" Yeah. And his response.
We put him to use, and what did we have him do? I forgot. So we did make use of him.
Yeah, I was there. It was one of my favorite stories of all time, because he went from a zero understanding. He actually told me that in that same conversation, I can go to a library and start, picking up GIS if you want me to. Like the most like I'm never going to learn this attitude ever, and he'll recognize that. And then I was like, no, we're putting you to work. You're a writer, so you're going to be working with the drone. And then with the maps, the IEP maps, incident action plan maps, they're fairly straightforward maps. But if you have no GIS experience whatsoever, it can be complicated and confusing.
Yeah.
So we worked with him, and then Jessica and myself worked with him a lot on learning how to do that. In fact, his process of writing and be able to do things from like an analytical standpoint of like documentation, He gave me, when he left the deployment, the exact, like, you're talking about how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. As a kid, you have that assignment. You're like, pull out the bread out of the cabinet. Oh, you forgot to open the cabinet. Open the cabinet, pull out the bread. So he went through that whole thing, and with absolutely no understanding whatsoever, you could make those maps. He did a really good job of detailing that out. So anyways, he ended up making like the IEP maps for like the last 2 weeks he was there. And that's a pretty cool thing that he was able to do, because he was like, hey, potentially the president of the United States will see these maps, Yeah. So, hats off to him for that. But that shows you, from you and I standpoint, I felt like I was kind of drowning there for a while. This mug that, I held up earlier before we started recording, I call it my 24-hour mug. It was like, I don't know how many days into it, I was so exhausted. I hadn't slept in days. And I look over, if you can't see, if you're listening to the audio section of this, there, I had my hand on my fist. My hair just looks ridiculous. I look exhausted. And James like, hey, and I'm like, what? And he's like, stand still. And he took a picture of me. And then next thing I knew, as a parting gift, he had put that picture on a mug. Pretty hilarious. So thanks for the mug. But, I really felt like I was drowning there, and trying to get everything done. And first, I don't know. Did you feel like that at any point? Did you feel like you were so overwhelmed with the amount of tasks you had to do?
Yeah, there were a couple days where it felt like that.
Yeah.
Just because when I got there, it was like you had gone through the worst of it.
Yeah.
And so I was getting there right after, when it was what I called starting, the period where it was starting to stabilize.
Yeah.
And so I was fortunate that way. Not so good for you. But there were a couple times where it was, it wasn't as bad. When I remember during Sandy, my wife came out and she stayed, with me in New York. It was great for her because she was in New York during the day, staying in a nice, in a hotel. Anyways, I'd get off at like midnight, and luckily we were in New York, so restaurants were still open. And I remember like we would go out and eat, and she said that I was so tired that I was slurring my speech. Like I was drunk, even though, I hadn't had anything to drink yet. So,
Yeah, that's really funny you bring that up. Do you remember Patrick McGinn?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, yep. There was a dinner, midnight type of dinner he and I went out to. This is probably our second or third week out there, and everyone was like having like this really, really nice dinner, and then for no reason whatsoever, we just like looked at each other and just started laughing. Couldn't control it, and we just sat there laughing for like 15 minutes, and nobody else knew what was going on. We didn't know what was going on. It was being delirious. We were just so tired.
Yeah, totally.
None of us should have been driving. That was like the worst
how
idea.
Insane it all is, right? A FEMA blackout, huh?
Yeah, FEMA blackout. That's a term for you. I'm gonna coin that. Yeah, you're talking about working like all-nighters. We were, thinking of that kind of tempo that we were in the beginning. When all the reservists got there, they were like, I remember Paul specifically, he's like, man, I've been up since 2 a.m., getting on flights out here. And I was like, oh, that sucks. Well, I have some projects for you to do. They stayed that first day. And I talk about as a leadership to a subordinate, maybe not the best situation to ask somebody to stay up like, really long hours, but they did it on their own initiative. And I knew from day one I could trust them because I was exhausted. They were probably exhausted and they were totally cool. Paul told me later on, he was like, I didn't really want to do it. Right. I don't have that patience to do all-nighters. But I saw how tired you were. Anyway, so he ended up staying and that first night, and they did they were just, I don't know. I was willing to go to bat for them on anything after that, because like, if you're going to help me out, I'm going to help you out. And that's a good call out too.
Yeah. I found for me, when it would get under my skin was I could do all-nighters, just as long as I had some idea, like, oh, it's going to be a long day, long night.
Yeah.
It was when it came in right before I left.
Yeah.
That was when it got under my skin. I was like,
my first disaster with the team, there was a confusion who was working day and night. I was working days, and I was just working really long. I'd end up working, typically it's a 12-hour shift, right? But I was going like 15 hours and staying there till midnight. And the FCO was also my new boss, and he thought I was just going home like at midnight, like 6 hours early. And so what he was doing to quote unquote teach me a lesson, because he didn't know I had a ton of experience at that point, he would call me constantly throughout the night from my hotel room and have me do quote unquote reports. So I was doing these reports for like several days for him, getting like basically no sleep. And day 3 or day 4 came around, and I'm there at 6 a.m. with everybody else, and he goes, "Hey, like, what are you doing here? Like, you should get some sleep." I was like, "I'm on day shift." He goes, "Oh my gosh, this whole time I thought you were on night shift, and that's why I've been giving you work." But after that, he knew that I would work, and so it made my life much easier to work with somebody who trusted me.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Yeah. So, man, talk about good lessons. You're looking at this camera.
You establish trust the hardest way possible.
Yes.
I mean, usually as long as someone seemed, at least when I could usually tell. I mean, they usually played nice.
Yeah.
And they seemed pretty open and wanted to help. So
who's like
most
that?
people I work with, people were like that.
Yeah. Speaking of good FEMA people, Region 10. What was her name? Cynthia.
Yeah, Cynthia Mccoy.
Yeah. She's one of those people that I only knew her through that experience, the disaster. But I would have gone to bat for her for something that she needed too, because she was one of those people that genuinely just a good person.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
She was definitely somebody that she played very nice. And actually, I don't know if she's still. I think I tried to look her up recently. I don't think I found her in there.
Yeah, she's with City of Seattle now, I think.
Oh, is she?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If you had LinkedIn, then you would know.
Yeah. I know I need to do it really bad, so I'm really behind the times here.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know.
So we're gonna end up this podcast because I've already kept you on here for way too long, and I really appreciate you taking the time with me. But before I do, at the end of every podcast, we ask, we call it rapid fire, where I'll just ask you 2, 3, 4 questions. The one should be very obvious, the last one. But just give me your quick opinions, and we'll go from there. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. In emergency management, what's one thing you want to actually change? If you could actually nail it down to one thing, what would it be? I know
there's a lot of things, but I think being able to it depends on the organization.
Yeah.
I wish it was better integrated into people's lives.
Ooh, interesting. I like that one.
And the reason why I say that is because, and this is something I thought about doing myself, even though I don't really have time right now, maybe when my daughter's a little older. But, you think about, like they always say, you got to keep like 2 weeks supply of water and all that stuff. A lot of people don't have that. Some people don't even have the ability.
Yeah.
To some degree, that might be kind of a class-based issue as well. When I lived in Seattle, I lived in a little apartment. We didn't have space for all of that. And I thought, well, what if, like, as a community or something, we all had kind of worked together as a stockpile? but just a general awareness in the community and have that more built into our lives in some ways. It would be better across the board. People would be more prepared. Anyways,
a community-based preparedness rather than an individual-based preparedness. I like that.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So your favorite food down in Texas was Mexican food?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'd say so, or Tex-Mex. I mean,
Tex-Mex.
Yeah.
Dude, real talk, I still don't understand the difference between Mexican and Tex-Mex. It has something to do with corn?
I think with Tex-Mex, they use more wheat, as part of it. Some parts of Mexico might use wheat-based like tortillas, but that's one of them. A burrito, I know, is also a Tex-Mex thing. Was not traditionally Mexican. I know there's a few things like that, but I'm nowhere near an expert.
If you were going to name your favorite GIS product that you ever did for emergency management, what would it be?
Probably the thing I would probably have to name would be a map I made that ended up going to the president, and it was probably the worst map I ever made. But it's my favorite because I had very, very little time to get it done.
Wait, I think I know this story. Is this the gas stations in Sandy?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, I had about 2 minutes to do it. And the fact that I got it done, I was so proud of myself. There was another one also when I was in Rhode Island back in 2010, right? Dating myself here. And I got asked to make this product for the state. And the person who had been making the product, he had used some, methodology, and he was gone by that point. And they said, we need this in like 30 minutes. And so I had 30 minutes to try to figure out the methodology and get this map done. And I went into this Zen mode and I just did it, man. I went into Zen mode and I did it. And I am still impressed about that.
You should be. That's why I like you, man. That's cool. That's really cool. That you don't even remember, but that's basically what you did with the, all the homes had 3 inches of water in it, thinking of topography and home elevation and all the other factors that you could possibly put into it, and you were able to do it. I mean, it's amazing I wouldn't say the glaze, but you go into like this mode where like there's like this aura of GIS around you, where like he's working on something important. Don't disturb the man. So that's awesome. I remember you telling me the story about giving that map to POTUS. I always hate doing the gas station map because there's just how do you scale the geographic size to the point data to everything else, point feature?
Yeah.
And yet it does tell a pretty good story. So that's cool that you're able to do it so quick, and it's that time crunch feeling, right? Of like, I was able to get something out so fast and just give it to the source. That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. So last question.
I didn't get fired. Awesome.
Yeah. That's so funny. That's awesome. Last question, most important question of the entire podcast. What is the best podcast for emergency managers?
I'm going to have to go with Disaster Task.
Hey, that's a pretty good option. All right, James, thanks so much for coming on, talking to me pretty candidly about your response experience. Again, everybody, if you liked this episode, we'd ask you to give us that 5-star rating and subscribe, of course, to our podcast so that we can get people like James back on here, maybe even get him back on here in the future. If we didn't ask questions that you want James to answer, please send us an email at info@dobermanemg.com, and maybe we can, again, have him back on here. And, of course, you can follow us on Instagram at Disaster Tough Podcast, where you can see a little bit more about James and hear about this podcast.